are now listening to The Big Trade with Peter Pham, enlightening conversations for maximum market returns.
Porter, welcome to the Big Trade series. You're doing a lot of big trades these days yourself. Why don't you tell us about them?
You know, Peter, I know if you've been following my work, you know a little bit about the credit cycle and about why I'm so cautious right now about the quality of credit, both in the United States and actually around the world as well.
Okay.
So I think it's a great time for people with volatility so low and with credit risk so high. I think it makes sense for people to hedge themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been talking about buying very low cost put options, not as a speculation, but as a hedge against your other equity interests.
In terms of this idea of capitalizing on this opportunity, as you indicated, and as we've seen in some countries, is that typically the state will intervene in terms of the magnitude of the downside potential for some of these equities. When you think about a position such as like taking like an option position or buying like a particular put on a company that you think could be suffering from potential credit issues in the future, obviously there's a lot of potential downside. You could basically lose all your money, or you could make a lot of money, although there's always a circumstance in which the state could intervene and implement safeguards to ensure that the company is protected. So from a risk-reward profile, how does that shape out for you?
It really doesn't play a role at all in my thinking. In my experience, governments, countries will take steps to protect their banking systems.
Yep.
Meaning that they will intervene to protect creditors so that financial stress doesn't spread. You know, they can control the contagion, as they call it.
Mm.
And the reason why they do that is because they are already insuring banking deposits.
Yep.
So they basically, it's kind of like a forest fire scenario. You want to put the forest fire out before it spreads. So I can imagine, just for example, let's look at the extremely high number of BBB credits that have been issued in the last 5 years in the U.S.
Mm.
So normally BBB, which is the lowest tranche of investment grade debt. Normally BBB makes up 10 to 15% of investment grade issuance. In the last cycle, BBB made up over 30% of the investment grade issuance. And what I can see is that, therefore, investment grade doesn't mean really what it used to. It has been degraded. Right. And the peak in default rate in the BBB space was in 2002, where you had 1% of BBB default. Now, investment grade debt is very important to understand, because investment grade debt is what's owned by other leveraged financial institutions. Mm-hmm. It's kind of the building block, if you will, of the entire paper money system. And without investment grade credit, you can't have the pyramiding effects that you get through credit expansion. So it's very important to the government that the BBB credit remain viable. So I can imagine, just as I'm throwing this out there, I can imagine a scenario where default rates in BBB reach 4 to 6%. So 4 to 5 to 6 times larger than they ever have been historically during the next credit contraction, which I believe is actually underway. So, and let's say in 2018 or 2019, you see default rates on BBB of 4 or 5%. That would threaten the entire banking system, because that would be something on the magnitude of $200 or $300 billion in credit defaults owned by leveraged financial institutions in the United States. And that kind of scenario, I can definitely imagine the government stepping in to save creditors in order to prevent the forest fire from spreading. But I don't believe that will have any impact whatsoever on the shareholders. And if you'll notice, you know, we're suggesting hedging yourself in the equity part of the corporate structure, not in the debt. So, take for example the bailout of Bear Stearns, a leveraged financial institution, had a bunch of mortgages that went bad. It failed. The government saved the creditors. They got dollar on dollar for Bear Stearns credit.
Right.
The shareholders suffered a 97%, 98% wipeout.
Mm-hmm.
So even when the government intervenes in order to stop credit problems, it does not typically intervene to save shareholders. You could look at AIG, you could look at Fannie and Freddie, you could look at General Motors, you can look at all of the major corporations where the government stepped in to aid creditors and did nothing for shareholders.
Right, right. Okay, let's just switch topics for a bit and let's talk about the recent election. What are your thoughts, and did you have a horse in the race?
No, Peter, I'm completely apolitical.
Yeah.
I don't vote. I don't generally engage in political conversations. And the reason is that I find that it's completely irrelevant to my work as an analyst. And that upsets people on both sides of the political aisle, but nevertheless, I believe it's the truth. Look, you've got one candidate who says he's going to take 39% of my wealth. I've got another candidate who says he's going to take 33% of my wealth.
Right.
And it boggles my mind that the people out there, who say, "Oh, I'm for this candidate or that candidate," there's not a hair's worth of difference between them. But man, you get a huge argument if you try to suggest that.
Right.
So look, you've seen a huge rally in stocks in the U.S. since Trump was elected.
Yep.
And I'm almost positive that fundamentally is because Trump is promising something that we haven't seen in America in a very long time, which is a enormous fiscal expansion. So, Trump is promising to reduce the impact of trade, meaning to reduce the disinflationary impact of the wonders of trade. And he's promising to up the size of government dramatically in our country. And what's so funny to me is that if a Democrat had promised these same exact things, he would have been called a communist and a traitor by most of the people who read my newsletter. But just because it's a Republican who's saying it, then that makes it okay. These policies will be devastating in the long term to the United States. There is no evidence whatsoever that government deficit spending, when a government is already bankrupt, is beneficial to any economy. And if it were, then Zimbabwe would be Switzerland, and it's not.
Are there any particular themes or sectors that could be compelling with Trump as a president, putting on your analyst cap as opposed to your political?
Yeah, and you've already seen it. I mean, I think you're going to see. I think you're going to see base metals have an amazing run because the policies that Trump is promising would be decidedly inflationary. So you could have a big move in gold, you could have a big move in silver, you've seen a big move already in copper and in steel, and I think that those things will continue.
I don't know if you remember our last conversation. We were talking about some of your children and how you were going through the process of raising them. Do you have any updates in regards to some techniques that you've been implementing or some content or books that you've been exposing them to over the last year or so?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. My 9-year-old son came to me about 6 months ago, and he said, "Hey, Dad, how do you do a differential equation?"
Okay.
Well, that wasn't really a question I was prepared to answer, especially for a 9-year-old. So we visited the Khan Academy, and I was very excited that their website has been so greatly improved. I don't know if you know the story, yes, but this fellow Khan was a successful venture capitalist, I believe, made some money, and then he was raising his children and wanted to do a better job educating them and wanted to integrate technology into learning. And so he started going into his closet and making these short videos and posting them. And then, lo and behold, Bill Gates found them and invested a bunch of money or donated a bunch of money to the Khan Academy, which is now like this really incredible online learning resource. And what's great about it is it takes a concept like algebra, for example, and it goes all the way from the very beginning of algebra, tells you the history of how it was created, and then teaches you step by step how to solve algebraic equations. And it's really neat because each video is only about 5 minutes long, and each video is only about one thing. So right, you learn each little discrete portion, and you take a little test on it, and then once you've proven that you know it, you can go on to the next video. So it's really been an amazing tool, and for children that are extremely bright, it's a wonderful resource for parents because, I mean, my child spent 3 hours on Saturday afternoon learning algebra, and I don't know how he could have done that without the Khan Academy.
That's fantastic. Although, in terms of like the contents in regards to like history and economics, I'd imagine that they still very much follow in line with what you would see in many major public schools. Does that is that a point of concern for you due to the fact that, say, for example, you might have more free market ideologies?
Yeah, I feel the same way about that as I do about religion.
Hmm.
My son goes to a private school, St. Paul's, that was founded a long time ago by the Episcopal Church.
Hmm.
And so there is still a veneer of religious doctrine that is he is taught. And I kind of feel like, learning how economics really works and learning what's really behind religion and learning what's really behind economics that you're taught is all sort of like learning about Santa Claus. It's all something that you eventually figured out for yourself. So I'm not really worried about the Keynesian economics or the big government history he's picking up from Khan Academy. He will be wise enough to see through those that indoctrination when he's mature enough to understand it.
What's interesting is, I guess, with further technological innovation, as we start to understand more through sciences and maths, then we're able to demystify some of these things that are unexplainable. But as of current, there's certain limitations to that, and then ultimately, even the scientists, the Einsteins, the Hawkins of the world, they do try to use some kind of metaphysical explanation to kind of explain, for example, the origins of the universe. So I just guess it's a way, it's a tool that can be utilized to help explain the unexplainable until we are capable of understanding much more.
Sure. I mean, human beings have a tremendous emotional response to fear. Tremendous. I know this as a marketer. And the biggest fear that every human being has is death. And people go to great lengths to find some comfort from this fear. And they have through all of history, and I'm sure they'll continue to do so. But I'm telling you, it's very interesting that most marketers who play upon the weak and their fears are despised in society. But for some reason, we allow certain people who play on those exact same emotions with the exact same kind of bullshit. We allow them to not only take enormous amounts of our wealth, we allow them to molest our children. We allow them to be free of many different social constraints. Somehow some people even allow them to lead them to suicide. I mean, there's all kinds of different varieties of these marketing promises and pitches, but it's all just total nonsense.
I was just thinking about the whole election and the whole electoral process, and many people will cite, "Hey, this isn't a real democracy because the popular vote ended up being a the majority didn't get their candidate elected in." But then I was thinking about the Declaration of Independence and how it does emphasize the republic, and I don't think many people can distinguish the difference between the two. So then,
Yeah,
I guess.
Americans don't know anything about their own government, and they don't have any idea how much our founding fathers despised and feared democracy.
And
America was never meant to be a democracy, and that we have become almost a democracy is terrifying.
Right. And I'd imagine, do you think that you could have the idea of like a free market state in correspondence with a republic? I guess that's the way that it could work in that idea.
I understand what you're saying, and I think that ultimately, though, those efforts would all fail because the person who is willing to commit the most amount of violence is ultimately going to be the person or the persons who are in charge of the government. So you could try to establish a market-based government, and there are many places where you have something very similar.
Mm.
I would point to Singapore and Hong Kong as notable examples of places where the government is run in a market-based way. So, for example, I mean, Singapore is a fantastic example of this, right? They have peak load pricing on all of their highways. There is nothing in Singapore that is free. There is not a single penny of welfare, So it's a very market-driven government. But the reality is that Singapore wouldn't exist without the protection of the United States military.
Hmm.
And if the United States government did not like the way that Singapore is being run, Singapore would change overnight.
Hmm.
So again, I think that I think that Doug's ideas and this idea that you could organize a government using the same processes that organize markets is deeply flawed, because it ignores the elephant in the room, which is whoever is willing to commit the most violence is the person who will eventually be in charge of the government.
All right, Porter, let's try to end this off by asking you, what are like the top 5 books that anyone should read if they want to be as brilliant as you are?
Oh, please, come on, Peter. I'm far from brilliant. Peter, that's a really great question, and off the top of my head, I will give you an answer.
Sure.
But let me say something before. There's a preface.
Okay.
A preface to my answer, which is, I was speaking with Jim Grant last week. I don't know if you read Grant's Interest Rate Observer, but it's a beautiful newsletter.
Okay.
And he's a brilliant guy. And I asked him, how did you end up as a newsletter writer? And he said, well, I was always a bookworm. And that answer resonated with me. So I don't know why, but from the time I was about 5 or 6 years old, I read constantly. I wasn't interested in television, and I'm no athlete. So I spent a lot of time reading. I can remember skipping school to read books because I was so engaged in them. I didn't want to be parted from them.
Right.
And my parents, God bless them, they agreed that they would buy me any book I wanted. So I would go to the bookstore every week and I would buy 5 or 10 books. And I would read them and read them and read them. So my number one answer to this question is, it truly doesn't matter what you're reading. It just matters that you're reading. And if you want to get ahead in life, turn off the television, put down the Facebook, spend 4 or 5 hours a day reading. And again, it doesn't matter what you read. It just matters that you read. So for my book list, I would tell you that I would start with all of the letters of Warren Buffett.
Okay.
I think that he's not only a great financial sage, I think he is an extremely wise man.
Right.
And he talks over, his letters, you can get copies of the ones back to the mid-1950s.
Right.
So he's been writing an annual letter about the affairs of the markets in the United States for over 50 years. And if you read those letters, and I'm no exaggeration, I've probably read them cover to cover close to 50 times.
Right.
If you read those letters, you will be imparted with a tremendous amount of wisdom.
Now, when you say the letters, Porter, are you also including the ones in his partnership as well? Like, or are you talking strictly about Berkshire Hathaway?
No, I'm talking about the partner letters that go back to the mid-1950s, and then he started writing the Berkshire letters, I believe, in about 1965.
Okay, so everything you're saying, basically.
Yeah, I've read them all. And by the way, the earlier ones are not nearly as good as the later ones. If you wanted to lighten the load, you could start with 1983 and go from there, and you'd get 97% of what I'm talking about. Right. The other interesting letter he wrote that I got a copy of, I'm happy to send you a copy of it, Peter, if you want to post it somewhere. He wrote a letter to Katharine Graham, a private letter to Katharine Graham in the mid-1970s, shortly after he bought his position in the Washington Post. And it's an absolutely brilliant exposition of the challenge of pension fund managers, and a great explanation of why Buffett preferred to invest in the stock market as opposed to simply buying whole companies. And as you know, that changed over time as whole companies began to trade at a discount relative to stocks. So his strategies changed, but the point is just, it's a wonderful. If you don't understand why people invest in the stock market at all, this letter really explains it. And he's speaking to a very educated, wealthy woman who has never ever known anything or done anything in the stock market. So again, it's a wonderful way of educating yourself. So all the letters of Warren Buffett would be tops on my list.
Okay. What else? You got to share us a few more, Porter.
I would tell you to pick up a great summary of the Bible. Actually, basically, between the Bible and Shakespeare, every single great story is told. And as a writer, you should know all of the plots. And if you read Shakespeare and you've read the Bible, then you have them all, and you can use them as you will. And I use stories from the Bible all the time to illustrate points because, like I said, they're all there. Every metaphor you'd ever want to make is in the Bible. And there's, of course, a reason why the Bible is probably the most printed book in history. I would probably get into an argument with someone who would say it's the Quran or the what's the Jewish book, the Talmud? But
Yes.
we're splitting hairs about that. The point is that much of human wisdom has been distilled into that book, and you should definitely have a very good understanding of it. What's next? What can I tell you next? Oh, very simply, pretty much anything by Bastiat is a very important primer to life.
Okay.
So Bastiat wrote, I would say he wrote two great works. He wrote a lot. He was a French politician in the mid-1800s, and at the time it was a very volatile period in French politics. And he wrote these great books about the proper role of the government in society. And one is called The Law, and it's a very short book. It's probably only 30 or 40 pages long.
Mm-hmm.
And the premise of it's quite beautiful. Do you know the book?
No, I don't. This is post-French Revolution, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. No, I'm not familiar.
So Bastiat's concept was really wonderful. It was just that the proper role of government is to be part of a society, not to dominate the society. And so he said that the government ought not to be allowed to do anything that the citizens cannot do. And it might sound like a little bit of a silly idea, but you have to read it to understand what he's talking about. It's great. And he also wrote another book just about economics called Economic Sophisms. And it's a wonderful explanation of economic fallacies. So it was Bastiat, by the way, who came up with the metaphor of the broken window. If you've ever had a good economics class, you know that while breaking a window might stimulate economic activity, it does not build wealth. And he goes through a wonderful explanation of why trade is beneficial. He talks about the corn laws in England and the negative repercussions of barriers to trade.
Oh,
so Bastiat is a fantastic read, and it'll give you all the basics of good government and good economics.
Okay, so two more.
Yeah, I'm coming along. I'm trying to think of a great primer just for saving and investing, and I'm not. Nothing comes to the top of my mind, which is odd.
What about Uncle Eric?
Well, yes, I personally am not a big fan of the Uncle Eric books. It's not that they're not good. Mm-hmm. I just there's something about the writing that doesn't appeal to me personally, and I don't mean to be critical of his work. It's lots of very important ideas. The Uncle Eric explanation of World War II is very valuable, among many others. Right. But it's just I don't think they're great reads. Let's throw Doug's newest book in there, Speculator.
You like that one? Okay.
I loved it.
Okay.
I couldn't put it down, and I thought it's a wonderful adventure. I thought it was very well written, and I thought it covered a lot of very important topics.
Do you think he's going to finish the whole series?
Yes, I do.
It sounds like it's going to be several books, and it's going to take many, many years.
Well, Doug has a 12-cylinder mind, and when he finally gets around to doing something, you'll be surprised what he's capable of.
I wonder how this series will look like in the future. Like, if people will start referring to this as some kind of, like some must-read, like you are right now, basically. Because I think it's still too new, right, to be on the top of other people's lists. But I'm just trying to envision this whole series and how this character is going to develop, and if people will refer to it, and if it will have the kind of significance I think it could have.
Well, I've got one last book for you.
Okay.
That didn't occur to me earlier, but obviously this is a must-read, and that is the Intelligent Investor by Ben Graham.
Right.
It's chapters. I think it's chapters 9 and 20. Although when they make new versions, the chapters change a little bit. But the chapter about a margin of safety, and the chapter about how about being a conservative investor, it's all you need to know about investing.
Mm-hmm. There's this fantastic app that I just got a subscription to called Blinkist, and basically it's pretty good, reasonably priced. They have access to like 1,200 nonfiction books, encapsulating about like a summary of the book in both notes and in audio. I found it to be a pretty useful tool to be able to, because as you know, we're in an environment where there's just thousands and thousands of books being released, and sometimes you want to get the gist of it before doing that deep dive. So it's been a pretty useful tool that I've been using as of late.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring that up, because something that I've been doing for several years is I'll buy a book on Kindle, and I I will read the first couple of chapters, and if I like it, then I'll order the hardback and put it in my library and actually take the time to read it. So yeah, that sounds like a great tool for me. I appreciate the tip.
Well, Porter, it's been great talking to you. I wanted to talk to you more about investing in equities, but we always seem to go off onto these deep dives into other subjects about philosophy, religion, and books.
Yeah, well, it is a really fascinating time in the markets, and there are so many great businesses that have been started in the last decade. It is amazing to see what Facebook has done. It's amazing to see what Google has done. It's amazing to see what Amazon has done. And so it's a great time to be a capitalist, and I'm really excited about the future, which is funny because, I talk a lot in my newsletters about the risks of the markets.
Right.
But if you look at my portfolios, right, we're usually 90% long or thereabouts. So I think that people have an interest in what might go wrong. But I want to remind everybody that, man, we live in a beautiful world. Diseases are being conquered, life is being expanded, freedom is growing. There's lots to be bullish about.
Are you still using that investment approach of putting, like, say, for example, 50% of your savings on a particular idea? Are you still personally doing that on an annualized basis?
I actually gave up buying individual stocks about 6 months ago because we launched a new business, which is Stansberry Asset Management.
Right.
And so basically, in order to minimize any conflict of interest, all of my equity investments flow through Stansberry Asset Management and a blind trust that I don't control.
Great.
I don't know how my money is being invested, but that allows me
peace of mind.
No, it allows me the complete independence to write my newsletter without knowing or caring about how it might impact my own investments.
Yeah. All right, Porter. Well, thank you very much for coming on the Big Trade Series. We got to do it sometime soon again.
Peter, it was always a pleasure. I think that you do a great job with this, and I hope it is growing and does well for you.
We hope you enjoyed this mastermind session. If you'd like to contact Peter Pham or Phoenix Capital, please email info@phx-cap.com.